Welcome to Cancer Lesson 4.2, How Does a Tumor Leave Home? The goals of this lesson are to explore the process of metastasis, how tumor cells can spread from one location to another, and to consider how angiogenesis, the process by which new blood vessels form, helps cancer cells grow. At the end of the lesson, the students should be able to explain how a benign tumor cell becomes malignant and therefore able to migrate into surrounding tissue, explain how malignant tumor cells stimulate surrounding tissue to provide migration signals and how this capacity is analogous to the process of wound healing, and explain the process of angiogenesis and its significance in tumor invasion. We will achieve these goals with a board game activity that simulates metastasis. To prepare for this lesson, you'll need to review the following key scientific concepts that will be presented throughout this lesson. The ability of tumor cells to spread from their primary site through the blood or lymph to a secondary site in the body is called metastasis. To escape from the primary site, tumor cells must break down the basement membrane using enzymes called proteases, enter the stroma and then the blood or lymphatic system, and be deposited at a secondary site. Specific mutations allow the tumor to acquire these functions. You can review the scientific content in the background reading provided for you in the teacher primer, the teacher manual, and the student workbook. The teacher primer provides in-depth knowledge about the scientific content presented in this lesson. The teacher manual or lesson plan provides a minute-by-minute explanation of the lesson structure, and the student workbook provides additional explanation for students. You'll need to be sure to print the lesson worksheet and the homework worksheet, as well as the materials students will need to play the game. You will divide the students into groups of 6, so you will need enough sets for each group. The invasion game board and the mutation cards can be found in the materials folder for this lesson. The key points of the do now are that cells that hyperproliferate acquire mutations more quickly than normal cells, and some mutations can allow the tumor cell to escape from its primary site. We'll get there by comparing the process of wound healing to metastasis. We need to be more careful now in distinguishing between tumor cells that are hyperproliferating but restricted to the primary site and cancer cells that have the ability to migrate to a secondary site. Hyperproliferating tumor cells at the primary site are competing with each other for nutrients and space, so acquiring mutations that allow them to escape could provide a selective advantage, allowing them to find a new environment where they can thrive. Tumor cells with mutations that allow them to escape the primary site can migrate to other locations of the body, forming secondary tumors. Recall from lesson 4.1 that for a benign tumor to become malignant, it must acquire mutations that allow it to break through the basement membrane and invade the stroma. The next step after tumor cells have broken through the basement membrane is to migrate through the stroma and enter either blood or lymph vessels. Once in the bloodstream or lymph, the tumor can travel to other parts of the body. Metastasis involves the same kinds of processes that wound healing does, but in reverse. The connection between wound healing and metastasis is recruitment of the blood system to the site. In wound healing, the blood vessels are recruited so they can supply cells to heal the wound. In cancer, the blood vessels are recruited so the cancer cells can travel through them. Another connection is the loosening of the stroma. In both wound healing and cancer, the stroma needs to be loosened for the blood vessels and other cells to migrate through it. Some of the mutations tumor cells acquire affect molecules that signal blood and lymph vessels, causing new vessels to grow. This is called angiogenesis. The new vessels can now provide the tumor cells with more nutrients, and tumor cells can use the new vessels to escape from the primary site. These new vessels are more leaky than older vessels, allowing cancer cells to enter and exit more easily. The key points of the activity are that for a tumor cell to metastasize, it needs to randomly acquire a specific set of mutations. Some of those mutations affect the cell, and some affect the environment. There are usually trade-offs for every advantageous mutation. For example, cells that can divide rapidly may not replicate their DNA accurately. We'll get there by simulating metastasis with the invasion board game. In the lesson activity, students will play a board game that is similar to Chutes and Ladders, where students play as cancer cells and must roll the dice to move through the stroma to get into the bloodstream. This board game is called the invasion game. The lesson worksheet provides directions for how to play this game. The goal of the game is for a tumor cell to enter the bloodstream and survive. To metastasize, the cell must acquire a specific set of mutations, but these mutations are acquired randomly. After the game, students should complete the worksheet questions that prompt them to think about how different mutations affect the ability to metastasize. The key points of the wrap-up are that metastasis occurs in a defined sequence of steps. Once the cancer cell enters the blood or lymph, it is vulnerable to attack by the immune system. Cancer cells that acquire mutations that help them evade detection or prevent the immune system killing them survive. To wrap up the activity, we discussed the benefits of gaining various mutations, such as being able to loosen up the stroma and escape into the bloodstream. But once in the bloodstream or lymph nodes, tumor cells are vulnerable to shear forces of the bloodstream and by attack of the immune system. However, cancer cells constantly acquire new mutations. These mutations may allow them to evade detection. Students should be able to arrange these steps of metastasis in the correct order, from proliferation to migrating to forming a new tumor. Remember, cancer cells have to exit the bloodstream in order to form a new tumor or metastasis at a secondary site. For homework, have students read the handout on how the organ of tumor origin determines the types of organs secondary tumors will form in. One of the most common questions students have is, if I'm a cell in a tumor and can't yet break through the basement membrane, but some other cells in the tumor can I follow along? Yes, but at some point you may need to acquire additional mutations that will allow you to survive in the new environment. Another question students ask is, how can mutations in tumor cells help them evade the immune system? One way is that a mutation can change the proteins on the cell surface that killer immune cells recognize. We'll learn more about this in Lesson 4.4. At the end of the lesson, collect the lesson worksheets to assess students' ability to explain how malignant tumor cells can become metastatic. We will look more closely at the process of metastasis in the next lesson. Don't forget, if you have any questions, concerns, or feedback, to let us know. You can contact any of the CTSE team members and we'll be happy to help you.